Welcome back, dear dreamer, and tonight we drift into a realm where silence carries the weight of forgotten rituals. Beyond a bridge older than any kingdom, the forbidden land lies untouched, wrapped in a stillness that feels almost alive. Here, every stone and shadow seems to watch, as if remembering prayers once whispered beneath collapsing skies. It is a place abandoned by gods, yet shaped entirely by their echoes. In the center of this vast and silent world stands a shrine carved from ancient belief, a temple where light falls like a quiet blessing onto stone floors worn smooth by centuries of devotion. Around it stretch valleys, ruins, and monuments that bear no names, as if the land itself prefers to dream rather than speak. Everything here feels suspended, waiting, as though the past has simply stepped aside but never truly left. Before we begin, what are you doing tonight to help yourself fall asleep? Music, quiet thinking, or simply lying still in the dark? Tell me in the comments. I would genuinely love to read each one. And if these calm journeys help you rest, feel free to subscribe so we can keep wandering through forgotten worlds together. The journey into the Forbidden Land begins upon a bridge so ancient that time itself seems reluctant to touch it. Its stones stretch endlessly across a vast chasm, each slab weathered but unbroken, carved by hands belonging to a civilization long forgotten. Wind moves across its surface in slow, wandering currents, carrying dust that has traveled for centuries. There is no sound except the soft rhythm of hooves and the faint shifting of air. The bridge seems to hang not above earth, but between worlds, one that was left behind, and one that has been waiting in silence. At the bridge's far end, the land opens into a wide expanse of muted color. Grass grows in scattered patches, bending beneath a wind that carries no scent of life. The soil is cracked in some places, smooth in others, as though shaped by two different ages that never touched. Far in the distance rises a plateau of stone, its edges softened by the haze of afternoon light. The sky above is a pale, empty canvas, neither threatening nor welcoming, only watching. The descent from the bridge is quiet, almost solemn. The land accepts the traveler's arrival without shifting. Shadows stretch long across the valley floor, deepening the silence that drapes itself over every surface. The stillness feels deliberate, as if the entire realm is holding its breath. No bird cries out from the cliffs. No creature stirs in the tall grass. Even the air seems heavy, weighted by centuries of abandonment. Yet beneath that stillness lies a quiet expectation, as though the land recognizes the presence of a newcomer. At the foot of the bridge, the remnants of worn pillars emerge from the ground, their surfaces chipped but still upright. They resemble markers, perhaps once guiding pilgrims or guardians who walked this path in reverence. Their carvings, dulled by time, hold symbols of a language that no longer has a voice. Still, something about their design speaks of devotion, not to power, but to something older, something sacred. Beyond the pillars, the valley widens into a plain that stretches toward the horizon. Stone formations rise sporadically, casting faint shadows across the golden grass. These formations are irregular, almost too deliberate to be natural, yet too eroded to remain fully understood. Their surfaces are smoothed by wind, shaped by the elements into forms that resemble forgotten altars or the foundations of great halls. The traveler moves through them with steady purpose, the silence surrounding each movement like a gentle, constant heartbeat. The land begins to shift as the path continues. Grass gives way to patches of earth worn thin by long-lost footsteps. Cliffs rise on either side, narrowing the route into a steep corridor of weathered stone. At some points, the walls lean inward, their rough surfaces etched with faint traces of pattern. Not quite images, not quite inscriptions, but impressions left by a culture that once held deep meaning here. These marks whisper of rituals performed long ago, of offerings left beneath open skies, of prayers carried into the wind. The corridor opens abruptly into a clearing where the sun falls unhindered. In the center of this clearing lies a quiet pool, its surface unbroken except for the soft drift of leaves blown in from distant heights. The water glimmers with a purity untouched by time, reflecting the pale sky like a mirror waiting to be filled. The pool offers the first true sign of life in this barren realm, not because creatures gather at its edges, but because its presence feels intentional, as if placed here to remind travelers that even in silence, the land still breathes. Past the clearing, the path climbs slowly along the ridge of a hill. As height increases, the view widens, revealing the expanse of the Forbidden Land in greater detail. The plains stretch outward like a massive tapestry, woven from earth and stone. Rivers trace thin silver lines across the distant ground, flowing quietly as though unwilling to disturb the silence. Mountains lie far beyond, their peaks softened by mist, forming a horizon that feels both unreachable and eternal. From the crest of the hill, the most striking structure in the landscape reveals itself, the shrine of worship. It stands at the heart of the plain, its towering form rising from the earth like the spine of an ancient god. The temple's pillars reach skyward in solemn grandeur, though much of the structure looks as though it has slept for ages. Cracks line its surfaces, and vines cling to its edges. Yet despite the decay, its presence is powerful, commanding attention with an authority untouched by ruin. Approaching it requires crossing a narrow gorge where water runs in a quiet stream below. The path that leads across the gorge is lined with stones arranged in patterns too symmetrical to be natural. They stand as markers of old processions, guiding those who once walked this sacred route. As the traveler crosses, the wind shifts subtly, carrying the faint scent of stone warmed by the sun. It is the first sensation that feels truly alive since entering the land. The plains near the shrine are marked by ruins scattered across the field, fallen arches, broken statues, half-buried foundations. Each fragment speaks of a civilization deeply bound to something divine. The carvings show forms that resemble beings of immense size, guardians or spirits perhaps, etched with reverence rather than fear. Their expressions, though eroded, hold a solemn grace, suggesting that the colossi worshipped here were not merely protectors, but sacred embodiments of belief. As the shrine draws closer, its massive entrance becomes clear. A grand staircase rises from the earth, leading toward a shadowed archway framed by towering stone columns. Each step is worn, smoothed by countless feet from an age when the land was alive with worship and ceremony. Light filters through narrow openings high upon the structure, casting thin beams that dance across the stone like strands of forgotten divinity. The traveler ascends the staircase slowly, each step echoing faintly against the stone. The air cools with each rise, as though the shrine's interior has preserved a pocket of time untouched by the elements. The entrance looms ahead, dark and still, a threshold into a place where the sacred and the forsaken intersect. It does not feel abandoned, it feels dormant. Inside the archway, the light fades into long shadows. Dust drifts through the air, illuminated by thin beams of sunlight that pierce the ceiling above. The sound of soft wind echoes faintly through the hall, carrying with it the sense that the land's history is still very much awake. Every surface, every crack, every corner of the shrine appears to hold meaning, not spoken, not written, but felt. And there, within the quiet of that ancient hall, the journey into the Forbidden Land truly begins. A path shaped by silence, memory, and the weight of a world once touched by the divine. Within the shrine of worship, light falls in long, narrow beams that stretch across the floor like silent pathways. Dust drifts lazily through the shafts, swirling in slow motions as if stirred by breath rather than wind. The air is cool, carrying the faint scent of stone that has been undisturbed for centuries. The hall itself rises into a ceiling lost in darkness, supported by pillars carved with ancient motifs whose meanings have been erased by time. Everything within the shrine feels suspended, as though the world outside still moves, but here, time folds into quiet stillness. As the traveler steps deeper, the sound of footsteps grows softer, absorbed by the vastness of the hall. On either side, alcoves stretch into shadow, each holding remnants of forgotten worship. Broken pots, fragments of carved wood, and faint outlines of murals remain on the walls, barely visible beneath layers of age. They show figures bowing toward enormous shapes, suggesting reverence toward beings too colossal to be fully depicted. These faint images seem to hum with the memory of devotion, even though the people who once placed them here have long vanished. At the far end of the hall, a wide, circular platform rises slightly above the stone floor. It is smooth and polished, untouched by erosion, as though preserved by forces beyond the natural world. Light gathers gently upon it, forming a pale glow that contrasts with the surrounding dimness. This platform is the shrine's heart, the place where prayers were once spoken and where unseen forces listened. The air over it feels subtly heavy, almost watchful, as if the chamber itself waits for something to stir. Beyond the platform, a straight corridor stretches deeper into the shrine. Its walls narrow, guiding the traveler toward a towering door engraved with symbols too intricate to decipher. The door is slightly ajar, allowing a thin line of darkness to seep out as if the chamber beyond rests in deeper shadow. This door marks the passage to the inner sanctum, a place where the sacred and the forbidden touch. The traveler pauses before continuing, sensing that beyond this threshold lies the power he has come seeking and the cost that remains unknown. Inside the inner sanctum, the ceiling dips lower, supported by thick columns etched with runes. Their meanings are lost, yet their forms radiate a quiet gravity that suggests the presence of something beyond the mortal realm. Faint echoes hum through the chamber, like distant voices carried by the air. They are not loud enough to be understood, only perceived, fragments of memory lingering from ceremonies once held in this sacred place. The sound is neither welcoming nor threatening. It simply exists, part of the sanctum's long-forgotten purpose. At the center of the room lies a deep circular well, its interior carved smooth and dark. The well does not hold water, only emptiness, an abyss of shadow that seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The edges are lined with ancient markings, symbols that spiral inward like a map, leading to something hidden beneath the earth. It is here that the voices seem to gather, rising subtly with each breath of air. This well is the resting place of something that has waited in silence for ages, neither asleep nor awake, suspended between presence and absence. The traveler steps closer, drawn by an instinct stronger than caution. As he stands at the edge, a faint gust rises from below, carrying with it a sensation that resembles both warmth and cold. The air thickens, trembling slightly, as if stirred by an unseen hand. For a moment, the hall seems to hum in unison with the well. The distant echoes grow clearer, forming tones that resonate like a breath trapped between worlds. And though no words are spoken, the traveler knows he has reached the place where desire and consequence meet. He remains still, feeling the energy rise from the depths. The light above dims slightly, and shadows dance along the walls as if awakened by the stirrings below. The chamber feels smaller now, drawn inward by an invisible force that gathers at the well's center. The echoes swell again, not loud but unmistakable, a single harmonic pulse that vibrates through stone and air. The traveler senses that something ancient is aware of his presence, watching from a place beyond sight. When the echoes fade, the chamber returns to silence. The air settles, though the memory of that resonance lingers like the afterglow of a distant storm. The traveler steps back, not in fear but in understanding. The shrine has acknowledged him. It has measured his purpose, weighed his resolve, and found him willing to continue. The path forward will not be guided by instruction or marked by signs. It will be shaped by the choices he carries within him. Leaving the inner sanctum, the traveler returns to the main hall. The beams of light have shifted, tracing new pathways across the stone. Dust continues to drift in lazy spirals, glowing softly where the light touches. Outside the entrance, the forbidden land lies unchanged, calm in its quiet vastness. The visitor pauses at the threshold, taking in the open plain that stretches beyond the shrine. The world feels different now, not outwardly, but within. The silence that once felt empty now feels full, as if the land holds its breath not in stillness, but in expectation. He descends the steps, returning to the plains. The wind brushes lightly across the grass, carrying the scent of distant water and old earth. Shadows lengthen as the sun arcs across the sky, casting golden light over the ruins scattered nearby. Each ruin seems more meaningful now, each carved stone carrying the weight of an ancient history that sleeps beneath the surface. The traveler senses that every structure in this land holds a purpose, even if that purpose has been buried under centuries of abandonment. As he moves across the plain, the world around him responds in subtle ways. The air grows heavier at times, as though the land listens. At other moments, the wind shifts abruptly, curling around him with a whisper that feels almost like a memory. The plains are no longer simply an open stretch of earth. They are a resting place for rituals older than any kingdom, filled with stories etched into the stone and silence. To the north, mountains rise in jagged silhouettes, their peaks shrouded in faint mist. To the west, cliffs plunge into deep shadow, forming valleys untouched by footsteps. To the east, long stretches of desert shimmer beneath the light. And to the south, the shrine towers quietly at the center of it all, not a monument of worship, but a reminder of the bond between the divine and the forgotten. The traveler turns toward the plains beyond. Somewhere in the distance lie the guardians of this land, beings shaped by stone, spirit, and divine intention. The journey toward them begins not with a loud summons, but with this quiet departure from the shrine. Each step forward draws him deeper into the heart of an ancient promise, one bound by sacrifice and shaped by forgotten hands. The forbidden land does not reveal its truths quickly. It waits, patient and silent, as all sacred places do. And as the traveler continues across the vast plains, the world around him shifts ever so slightly, as if guiding him toward the first awakening, the beginning of a journey that will unravel the past and demand a price from the present. For here, in this land untouched by time, every path leads toward a Colossus waiting in the stillness, and the earth itself seems to know that the first encounter is near. The tower of stone rises from the heart of the forbidden land, like a monument carved from the memory of a vanished age. It stands alone on a broad plateau, its dark walls etched with the erosion of centuries, yet still carrying an unmistakable presence that sets it apart from every other ruin scattered across the realm. The structure does not appear abandoned so much as suspended, holding within it a quiet that feels intentional, preserved, purposeful. Nothing here stirs except the wind, and even the wind seems to soften as it approaches, as though respecting the sanctity of the place. A long stairway climbs toward the entrance, its steps worn smooth through time. Moss creeps along the edges, clinging stubbornly to the cracks where stone is loosened. At the top, a massive doorway stands open, framed by carvings so faint they resemble shadows rather than symbols. They hint at stories long forgotten. Tall figures, towering shapes, spirals that resemble flowing light or rising smoke. The meaning behind them has been lost to ages of silence, but their presence suggests that those who built this place once understood forces that modern minds can only imagine. Inside, the air changes. It grows deeper, cooler, thicker, as though the walls themselves hold the breath of centuries. Light enters through thin openings high above, forming beams that spill across the stone floor like soft ribbons. Dust particles drift gently through the shafts, creating layers of quiet motion that contrast with the stillness of everything else. The hall is vast, its ceiling disappearing into a darkness so complete it feels endless. Pillars rise like ancient trees, holding the weight of the tower with silent strength. In the center of this immense chamber lies a circular platform made of smooth, polished stone. The floor around it shows faint grooves where footsteps once passed in patterns of ritual reverence. The platform itself glows softly where the sun's rays fall upon it, forming a pale halo of light that seems almost too delicate for a place built of stone. This is the heart of the shrine, the place where prayers were once offered, where supplicants knelt in hope or desperation, seeking the attention of beings far beyond human reach. Surrounding the central platform are alcoves carved into the walls. Some contain fragments of what might have once been statues, broken limbs, remnants of faces, chipped pieces of armor. Others hold strange, circular carvings that resemble seals or sigils, their patterns complex and nearly illegible. These alcoves feel like echoes, remnants of practices or ceremonies that shaped the lives of those who once came here. Each alcove carries a faint impression of reverence, as though each had been dedicated to a different guardian, spirit, or force. Farther in, long corridors stretch into the dimness, their walls lined with more carvings. Some depict towering forms with shapes both human and animal, blended as if sculpted by minds that understood a different form of existence. Others show landscapes, valleys, cliffs, oceans, and mountains, arranged in ways that resemble maps, yet not of any land that exists now. These images suggest that the shrine was more than a place of worship. It was a monument to knowledge, a record of a civilization that once held deep communion with powers residing beyond sight. At the rear of the shrine lies the largest chamber, a vast sanctum where the floor slopes downward into a circular pit. At its center rests a stone altar, cracked but still intact, shaped with precise craftsmanship that contrasts with the ruins surrounding it. The altar bears a single carved emblem, a spiral descending inward, symbolizing descent into the unseen, the crossing of boundaries between mortal and divine. Around it, the stone floor is stained darker, as though countless rituals took place here, ceremonies of offering, plea, or transformation. Above the altar, an opening in the ceiling allows a narrow beam of light to fall directly upon it. No matter the position of the sun, this beam finds its mark, suggesting that the shrine was constructed with astronomical precision. The light does not brighten the chamber. Rather, it creates a small island of illumination surrounded by darkness. It is a focal point, guiding the gaze of anyone who enters, drawing the mind toward something buried beneath the surface. Below the sanctum lies the descent into the shrine's depths. A circular staircase winds into the earth, lined with rough stone and shadow. The air grows colder here, the scent of soil stronger. The sound of the traveler's footsteps echoes softly, as though swallowed by the walls. At the bottom lies a great sealed door carved with patterns resembling interlocking arcs. The stone is darker here, almost metallic, and the carvings carry an energy that feels faint but persistent, like an echo preserved for ages. This door marks the threshold between the shrine's sacred space and the realm beneath, the domain where something ancient rests. The architecture of the shrine reveals a strange truth. It was built not for the living, but for communication with forces that do not dwell on the surface. Every carved line, every corridor, every chamber seems designed to guide thought downward, toward the depths where the unseen resides. The builders crafted the shrine as an instrument, a structure capable of channeling intention, prayer, or offering toward something sealed beneath. Outside the shrine, the land stretches wide with plains, canyons, and towering monoliths. But here, within these walls, the forbidden power at the center of the realm feels closest, as though one stands at the gateway to a place where light and shadow merge. The shrine serves as both conduit and barrier. It allows presence but guards truth. It invites approach but warns against reaching too far. The silence within the shrine is unlike the quiet of the open plains. It is layered, dense, almost breathing. It carries the weight of all prayers once spoken here, the hopes and fears of forgotten worshippers, and the echoes of voices that sought something beyond the mortal world. It is a silence that has watched ages pass and has remained unchanged. The traveler stands within this hush, absorbing the atmosphere that surrounds him. The stone beneath his feet is cold, the air unmoving, the light unwavering. The shrine feels neither welcoming nor hostile. It simply observes, waiting for purpose to unfold. It knows why he has come, even if he has not yet stepped to the deepest point where purpose and consequence converge. Outside, the plains wait in their eternal quiet. Inside, the shrine endures, unchanging, timeless, a monument to a world whose knowledge has been lost, but whose power remains, sealed beneath the stone and shadow. The deeper the traveler moves into the shrine of worship, the more the air begins to feel charged with something not entirely of this world. It is subtle at first, a faint resonance in the stone that seems to react to movement, as though the walls remember every presence that has passed through their halls. The atmosphere thickens not with threat, but with meaning, as if each breath carries traces of an ancient ritual still echoing beneath the visible surface. The very structure seems to absorb the newcomer into its vast history, drawing him into a space where the boundaries between past and present blur. In the upper chambers, rays of sunlight continue to fall through narrow slits in the ceiling. They illuminate small patches of the otherwise shadowed interior, forming golden pools that drift across the stone as the hours shift. These shafts of light highlight symbols carved with delicate intricacy, spirals, intersecting lines, and elongated figures whose purpose cannot be immediately understood. Time has softened their edges, but the intent behind them remains sharp. They seem arranged not for decoration, but for alignment, forming geometries that respond to the sun's path, and perhaps once guided ancient rituals performed here. The traveler moves quietly along the high walkway that circles this chamber, passing beneath arches carved with patterns that resemble flowing water or rising flame. These motifs repeat throughout the shrine, suggesting a culture that saw natural forces not as separate phenomena, but as interconnected aspects of a greater whole. The shrine, in its design, appears to honor this unity. Each surface seems to follow a deliberate symmetry, guiding the eye toward the central sanctum where the altar rests. Descending a wide stairway, the traveler reaches a hallway that runs deep into the heart of the structure. The air here is different, colder, stiller, as though never touched by wind. The walls narrow, forming a long corridor where the silence deepens. The carvings along these walls shift in tone. They depict towering shapes that mirror the forms of the colossi scattered throughout the Forbidden Land. Some appear as silhouettes etched into the surface. Others are rendered with surprising detail, revealing textures of stone, fur, or wing. Their poses appear solemn, almost contemplative, as though they were not beings of violence, but embodiments of an order understood only by those who carved them. At the end of this corridor lies a massive archway leading into the shrine's lowest open chamber. Here, the ceiling rises once again into a high vault, but unlike the entrance hall, no sunlight penetrates this space. Instead, faint illumination comes from the stone itself, a soft glow that seems to emanate from thin lines embedded in the walls. These lines create a circular pattern across the floor, a map of energy that may have once served as a conduit for ancient rites. Standing within this circle, one can feel a subtle vibration beneath the stone, pulsing slowly like the heartbeat of something that has not fully awakened. This chamber also houses the remnants of monumental statues, figures shaped from blocks of stone larger than any human could move. Though worn and fragmented, their forms suggest beings with immense presence. Their hollow eyes overlook the room with an expression that wavers between watchfulness and mourning. The traveler pauses here, sensing that these statues once held significance beyond symbolism. Perhaps they represented guardians or conduits for divine presence, or fragments of a story that predates the colossi themselves. A narrow passage cuts into the chamber's far wall, sloping downward toward the shrine's most secret depths. Here, the influence of the world above diminishes almost entirely. The walls are rougher, less adorned, carved not with artistry but with stark precision. The descent feels intentional, like a movement toward something that was meant to remain hidden. The temperature drops further, and the faint echo of distant water begins to emerge, soft, rhythmic, steady. It is the sound of the shrine's foundation touching the underground currents that nourish the land. At the bottom of this passage, the traveler arrives at a stone chamber unlike any other in the shrine. It is circular, enclosed completely, with no windows or openings. In its center lies a seal, a massive stone slab carved with layered rings that spiral inward. The rings overlap in such a way that the seal appears to move when viewed from the corner of one's eye, as though its design resists stillness. Faint lines radiate outward from it, continuing up the walls like veins carrying a slow, ancient pulse. This is the deepest point of the shrine, the threshold between the world above and what remains below. The seal is not merely a barrier, it is a boundary created through deliberate intent. Everything about the shrine seems constructed to feed energy, reverence, or longing toward this one point. Whatever lies beneath has been given both honor and restraint. Nothing rests beyond this sealed chamber by accident. This space is the nexus of the entire structure. The faint glow from the walls intensifies near the seal's edges. The stone around it is smoother than naturally carved surfaces, as though worked by force beyond tools or hands. Patterns ripple across it, subtle movements of light and shadow that suggest the presence of something dormant, held in stasis by the structure that binds it. The traveler senses that beneath this seal lies the entity once addressed by those who worshipped here, the presence that shaped the land, the voice that has lingered throughout the ages even as its form has remained imprisoned. Yet the shrine offers no guidance, no inscription giving instruction or warning. Instead, it communicates through atmosphere alone, a profound silence that holds both invitation and consequence. The stillness suggests that the shrine once acted as a meeting ground between the mortal and the divine, but also that such meetings were not meant to occur freely. Access required ritual, sacrifice, or intention of great significance. As the traveler retraces his steps upward, the shrine seems to shift subtly around him. The shafts of light in the upper halls glow slightly warmer, as though acknowledging movement within the deeper layers. The carvings seem sharper, the corridors narrower, the silence deeper. It is as if the shrine has awakened from its long slumber, stirred not by the presence of worship, but by the mere act of crossing its boundaries. When he emerges again into the central hall, the platform beneath the sunlit opening appears almost luminous. Dust floats in gentle spirals through the beams of light, forming patterns that resemble the spirals carved upon the sealed stone far below. The symmetry between these spaces suggests a connection, a flow of energy from sky to earth, from light to shadow, from offering to containment. The shrine stands not only as a monument to an ancient civilization, but also as a vessel designed to hold a power that neither vanished nor aged. Its walls hum with the memory of rituals performed, offerings given, and prayers unanswered. It is a place where the boundary between the sacred and the forbidden thins, where intention can shape consequence, where stillness carries the weight of old decisions. Outside, the wind sweeps across the plateau, brushing against the stone with a soft sigh. Inside, the shrine waits as it always has, silent, observant, timeless. It remains the center of the forbidden land, the heart of purpose and sacrifice, the place where all paths eventually converge. Though ages have passed, its presence has not dimmed. It continues to stand as the silent witness of a power bound beneath its foundation, a power that watches, listens, and waits. the traveler departs the shrine's shadow, stepping back into the sunlit plain. Yet the memory of the stone's silence follows him, carrying with it the sense of something vast and ancient stirring just beneath the threshold of the world. Beneath the towering structure of the shrine of worship lies a darkness older than any ruin above it, a presence that clings to the stone like a memory that refuses to fade. This presence is neither slumbering nor awake. It exists somewhere between the two, suspended in the stillness that fills the Forbidden Valley. It is here, deep beneath the shrine's foundation, where ancient power once gathered and was sealed away, wrapped in layers of ritual, intention, and fear. No footsteps echo in this depth. No wind finds its way through the narrow passages. Only a quiet tension remains, as if the land itself holds its breath around something it cannot forget. Long before any wanderer set foot upon the stone bridge, long before the colossi stirred at the edges of the realm, there was a time when beings of immense power shaped the world through forces now lost. In those early ages, the essence of life and shadow moved freely, woven into the rhythms of creation like threads of opposing colors. Over time, these forces grew heavy with consequence. Power, left unchecked, began to sink into itself, curling into storms of light and darkness. From this storm arose a presence that the old ones named, but never fully understood, a consciousness that drifted between brilliance and shadow, possessing neither shape nor certainty. This presence came to be known as Dormin. Not a god, for no heavens claimed it, not a demon, for no malice guided its existence. It was a force bound to its nature, shaped by the currents of life and death that swirled through the early world. Dormin moved where power gathered, drawn to the places where life folded into shadow and shadow blossomed into renewal. It lingered near the wells of ancient energy, absorbing secrets that even the old civilizations dared not speak aloud. Over ages, Dormin became a whisper beneath creation, a murmur carried in forgotten winds, a presence felt but rarely seen. Yet power in its purest form brings fear. The people who lived in the valley before its fall studied Dormin with awe, believing it to be a bridge between states of being. They built shrines to observe the shifting of its energy, carving symbols into stone walls to capture fragments of its presence. But their fascination soon faltered as they realized that Dormin's nature was too fluid to be contained. It could seep through barriers unseen, drift into the living world, and grant what should not be granted. Its voice held weight. Its essence could tilt the balance of fate. As reverence slowly turned to dread, the people sought ways to protect themselves from the quiet, growing influence beneath their feet. To the ancient keepers of the valley, the greatest danger was not that Dormin desired destruction, but that it possessed no desire at all. It acted according to the nature of the power that formed it, answering longing, responding to sorrow, and filling the spaces left open by desperation. Where life faltered, its presence deepened. Where hope frayed, its shadow grew. People would come whispering prayers into the cracks of the shrine, not realizing that their grief resonated within the chamber below. The more they sought salvation, the more the voice within the stone stirred. The valley slowly became a place where human longing carved deep channels into the land's ancient spirit. In time, Dormin began to manifest through faint disturbances, the trembling of small stones, the sudden stilling of wind, the way light shifted along the walls without cause. Scholars of the old order documented these signs with trembling hands, aware that something potent was gathering strength. They recorded accounts of shadows flickering where no flame burned, of air turning heavy as though carrying an unseen weight. The shrine grew colder, the halls darker, and the air thicker with each generation as Dormin's presence pressed closer to the edge of the sealed depths. Concern turned to fear, and fear turned to action. The ancient civilization crafted rituals to bind the presence, channeling their collective will into the stone. They carved runes across the pillars, embedding them with fragments of light to counterbalance the shadow. Through rites that spanned years, they divided Dormin's essence into many parts, scattering its energy across the land in forms that could not easily merge again. These fragments became the cores of the colossi, immense beings shaped from stone, fur, and spirit, each carrying a piece of the sealed power within its heart. In their creation, the world gained guardians of great majesty, but the valley lost the unity of an ancient force. The shrine above the sealed chamber became a monument of containment. Its high walls and open ceiling were designed to draw sunlight deep into the chamber, for the ancient keepers believed that light could restrain shadow without extinguishing it. As centuries passed, the structure stood firm, even as civilizations around it crumbled into dust. Nature reclaimed the valley, but the shrine remained untouched by time's erosion, preserved as though by the very force it imprisoned. The tower grew silent, but its silence was not empty. It was watchful. Deep beneath the shrine, Dormin's divided essence settled into uneasy stillness. The fragments that had once moved freely across the early world now whispered faintly within the colossi, their ancient heartbeat echoing through mountains, deserts, and plains. Though Dormin no longer drifted through the valley as a single presence, its awareness lingered, stretched thin across the land, reaching through stone and shadow. It was trapped, yet conscious, sealed, yet aware of every shifting wind and falling grain of dust. The valley itself became a vessel for Dormin's tethered memory. While the world above changed, Dormin remained suspended in time. It felt the footsteps of men visiting the shrine long after the civilization that built it had vanished. It sensed when wanderers approached the sealed chamber, drawn by the faint murmur of possibility. But the ancient seals held firm, preventing any voice from rising fully into the world. Dormin became a presence felt only by those who listened not with ears, but with longing, a longing strong enough to stir what the old ones had buried. And so, while the valley slumbered in sunlight and silence, the shadow beneath it never truly faded. Dormin waited, patient as stone, bound by the fragments of itself scattered across 16 towering guardians. It watched through memory rather than sight, heard through resonance rather than sound, and endured through ages that folded one upon another. For power that once shaped the world could not be erased. It could only be held in place by the will of those who feared it. And Dormin, though divided and confined, continued to pulse deep within the Forbidden Land, a quiet mystery waiting for the next desperate soul who might seek its hidden promise. Deep within the foundations of the shrine of worship, the sealed chamber rested like the still heart of the Forbidden Valley. Its walls were carved from stone that had never seen the sun, polished smooth by the hands of ancient priests who once walked these corridors with lanterns held low. Though centuries had passed, the air within the chamber remained unchanged. Cold, heavy, and quiet in a way that suggested the space remembered its purpose even when the world above had forgotten. Light from the open ceiling touched only the uppermost edges of the shrine. It never reached the depths where the sealed presence remained, suspended in a twilight that did not belong to day or night. Within this darkness, the fragments of Dormin's divided essence lingered like drifting embers of a once great flame. They pulsed faintly, responding to currents of ancient memory rather than the rhythms of the outside world. Each fragment belonged to one of the colossi scattered across the land, but deep down, below all stone and shadow, the echoes of these fragments still converged. They behaved like distant stars that remained gravitationally bound long after drifting apart. This subtle connection was the last remnant of Dormin's unity, a faint hum stretching across valleys, deserts, ruins, and cliffs. The chamber had been designed with precision. Its walls were thick enough to contain shifting spiritual power, and its pillars stood like sentinels guarding against the return of a force that defied categorization. These pillars held not only stone but intention, the focused will of the ancient civilization that had sealed Dormin away. Generations had poured their strength into the structure, layering ritual upon ritual, creating thresholds through which no uncontrolled power could pass. Even in ruin, these intentions endured, woven into the very grain of the stone, yet no seal lasts forever. Over time, the inscriptions on the walls began to fade, their symbols worn by the passage of ages. The land above shifted, winds scoured the exposed pillars, and vines crept across carvings once tended with reverence. The valley grew quieter, emptier, and more distant from the world of men. As the ancient civilization vanished from memory, the meaning of the shrine became lost, leaving behind only stone, silence, and the faint pulsing of a power no one remembered how to contain. The seals held, but their strength depended not only on structure, but on belief, and belief had long since vanished from the valley. Dormin felt this change as an erosion, a loosening of the grip that bound its essence, not a breaking, not yet, but a softening. The walls no longer pressed as firmly. The runes no longer glowed with the same intensity. The rituals, once renewed each generation, had gone unspoken for centuries. In its suspended state, Dormin drifted between near silence and faint stirring, sensing time passing like distant waves. It could not fully rise, nor could it fully disappear. It remained caught between possibilities, waiting for a moment when circumstance and will aligned once again. As the seals weakened, the valley above began to carry more of Dormin's resonance. The wind that swept through the plains sometimes moved as though nudged by unseen intention. The shadows cast by the shrine grew deeper at sunset, stretching longer than the angle of the light should allow. Animals avoided the inner ring of the valley, instinctively sensing the invisible boundary of an ancient disturbance. Even the colossi, far from the shrine, felt the faint tremors of Dormin's presence shifting beneath the earth. They stirred at times, lifting their massive forms as though listening for something older than their purpose. These changes were subtle, easily dismissed by any casual wanderer, but the land itself felt them. The ruins, once silent, began to hum with faint echoes of power. The ground trembled beneath the weight of forces gathering after centuries of quiet. Water that pooled in shadowed corners of the shrine rippled without wind. Light that entered through the broken roof refracted strangely, splitting into patterns reminiscent of forgotten symbols. The valley became a place that held more than emptiness. It held anticipation, the quiet tension of something waiting to be called. Dormin, despite being fragmented, recognized the shifting conditions. It did not think as mortals do, nor did it feel fear or hope. It simply existed within the patterns that shaped it. When the seals weakened, it responded by extending its awareness upward, feeling along the cracks in the ancient structure. When the boundaries tightened, it retreated inward, coiling like a shadow seeking its center. Dormin's nature was neither benign nor malevolent. It reflected the desires that reached toward it. Where the ancient keepers feared, it became a force to resist. Where mourners whispered for help, it became a force that answered. It shaped itself in the spaces between intention and consequence. Centuries passed with no one entering the valley. The silence became deeper, thicker, almost physical. Dormin's awareness drifted through that silence, tracing the contours of forgotten rituals and abandoned pathways. It sensed the faint glow of the colossi scattered throughout the land, each one holding a fragment of its divided essence. Though those fragments lay dormant within massive stone bodies, their cores pulsed faintly, responding to the slow change in the shrine. Dormin could not merge with them, not fully, but it could sense their presence in the same way that distant stars sense one another's gravity. The colossi stood in their isolated realms, deserts, lakes, chasms, ruins, their immense forms built from stone, living fur, and the last remnants of ancient magic. They were guardians, but they were also vessels, entrusted with a task that needed both endurance and sacrifice. In them, the ancient civilization had hidden the power that once made Dormin whole. As long as the colossi stood, Dormin would remain divided. Their size, strength, and isolation made them almost impossible to reach. and for generations, no one attempted the task. The valley remained undisturbed, and the seals remained steady enough to hold, but the slow passage of time had its own gravity. The world outside the valley changed. Empires rose and fell. Myths faded. Legends blurred. The Forbidden Land became a whisper passed between wanderers, a rumor without detail or certainty. Few believed such a place existed, and fewer still sought it. Those who did never returned with stories, for crossing the ancient bridge required both purpose and desperation, emotions strong enough to resonate with the power sleeping beneath the shrine. Dormin sensed these distant movements in the world beyond the valley. Not directly, but through the faint emotional impressions that drifted across the land. Sorrow carried on wind, longing embedded in footsteps, the quiet resonance of a heart burdened by loss. These impressions did not pierce the seal, but they touched its edges, stirring Dormin from its long stillness. The presence within the shrine began to gather itself more deliberately, coiling its fragmented awareness like threads preparing to weave. The valley responded. The air grew heavier, the silence deeper, as though waiting for a single event that would shift everything. The ancient bridge stood intact despite its age, stretching across a chasm that divided the realm of man from the Forbidden Land. The shrine, though worn, still towered above the plains with an authority that defied time. All elements of the ancient ritual remained in place, as though the land remembered the purpose for which it was shaped. Slowly, inevitably, the conditions aligned. A path long ignored would soon be crossed again. A soul carrying grief strong enough to resonate with Dormin's buried essence would soon step onto the bridge. The seals, weakened by centuries of silence, would stir once more under the weight of desperate intention. And in the chamber beneath the shrine, the presence that had waited through ages turned its attention upward, sensing the faint tremor of something approaching, the beginning of a movement that would set the Forbidden Land into motion and awaken every fragment sleeping within the colossi. Across the vast reaches of the Forbidden Land stand 16 colossal beings, each shaped by ancient hands that no longer exist and animated by forces older than memory. Scattered across deserts, lakes, cliffs, and ruins, they rise like living monuments to an age when creation itself was carved from stone and spirit. Their presence defines the land as much as the land defines them. To wander these empty plains is to feel their silent watchfulness, even when none can be seen. They are not guardians by choice, nor monuments by intention. They simply are enduring shapes of power, stillness, and forgotten purpose. Each colossus was formed as a vessel for a fragment of the ancient power sealed within the valley. Their bodies were crafted not only for strength, but for balance. Stone provided permanence, fur offered warmth, and the faint glow of ancient light bound their forms together. Their designs varied according to the landscapes they inhabited. Some were shaped to stride across open plains, others to climb rocky pillars or dwell in still waters. Yet all shared a common truth. They were too large to be ignored, too ancient to be understood, and too sacred to be approached without consequence. The civilization that shaped them did so with an awareness of the burden they created. They understood that Dormin's essence could not be simply scattered like seeds. It required hosts that could bear both the weight and the purpose of what they carried. So they forged beings that embodied endurance. These colossi were not alive in the manner of beasts, nor were they dead like the stone from which they were carved. They existed in a state between, animated by the rhythm of the fragments pulsing deep within them. Their hearts were cores of ancient energy, and through them, the seal on Dormin remained strong. When the civilization vanished, the colossi remained untouched by time. Their forms stood steady as centuries passed, resisting erosion, storms, and decay. Grass grew around their feet, moss clung to their shoulders, and birds built nests upon their crowns, yet their bodies did not crumble. They were as much a part of the land as the mountains and rivers. Even as the world around them changed, they endured, timeless and unmoved. Their purpose held them in place long after the rituals that created them had been forgotten. Some colossi rested in solitude atop plateaus shaped by wind and age, gazing across distances so wide that the horizon appeared to bend. These heights offered calm, and the air around them shimmered with faint echoes of the power within their cores. Others stood in deep valleys filled with mist, their massive forms half hidden by shadow, as though they belonged more to dream than waking world. Still others wandered slowly along paths carved centuries before, their movements rare but deliberate, the ground trembling beneath their weight whenever they stirred. Each colossus had its own realm, its own sanctuary carved through time. Lakes reflected the slow rise and fall of aquatic guardians, their surfaces broken by gentle ripples that hinted at the presence beneath. Canyons echoed with distant vibrations as stone limbs shifted along rock faces. Open deserts stretched before beings that cast shadows longer than roads, their bodies rising from sand like fragments of ancient temples. Ruins, long swallowed by moss and vines, served as resting places for colossi, whose forms blended almost seamlessly with the remnants of structures built in the age of the old civilization. To encounter a colossus was to experience awe and unease in equal measure. Their size defied comprehension, yet nothing about them felt hostile. They reacted not to the world's presence, but to the energy held within them. Birds circled overhead, unbothered by their movements. Small creatures wandered beneath their towering limbs, sensing no immediate threat. The colossi existed beyond conflict, beyond fear, beyond need. They were guardians not by will, but by design, each one preserving the seal within its core without understanding what it protected or why. Their bodies bore intricate markings carved by ancient artisans. These patterns, now softened by centuries of wind and rain, glowed faintly whenever the internal fragments stirred. The light traveled along their stone skin like veins beneath flesh, illuminating pathways that once guided rituals. Some markings spiraled across their arms and legs, others crisscrossed their torsos, while a few bore symbols that traced the outlines of forgotten constellations. These carvings served as silent testimony to the civilization that had shaped them, a people who believed in balance, sacrifice, and endurance more than any single deity. Though they seemed immovable, the colossi were not entirely still. Their movements were rare, yet unmistakably alive. A shift of weight could send tremors through the valley. A slow turn of the head could cast a shadow that stretched across an entire field. When their eyes opened, they glowed with a deep light, soft but alert, reflecting an awareness that existed outside human understanding. This awareness was not thought, not emotion, but a quiet recognition of their role within the land's vast design. They knew when to rise, when to rest, and when to listen to the pulse of the ancient power within. Some of the colossi possessed wings that once lifted them across great distances. Though they seldom used them now, the feathers are heavy and stone-like, still rustled softly in the wind. Others bore armor-like plates fused into their forms, remnants of rituals that strengthened their connection to the fragments they carried. A few were shaped with animal-like grace, moving with fluid steps despite their size. Others resembled walking fortresses, their bodies composed of layered stone that echoed with every breath they took. In the stillness of the Forbidden Land, the colossi served as natural monuments of the world's hidden history. Their presence was the thread that connected the valley's ancient past to its quiet present. Even as the rituals faded and the people vanished, the colossi held to their purpose, preserving what remained of an ancient decision made in fear and reverence. Their existence became the backbone of the valley's silence, the reason why no civilization returned, and the reason why the land remained untouched and unclaimed. Once, the colossi were revered. Pilgrims journeyed to witness their majesty, believing them to be divine protectors. Rituals took place at their feet, Offerings were left upon the ground, and songs echoed across the valleys. But as time moved forward and the old beliefs crumbled, those rituals stopped. The songs faded, the statues weathered. The valley emptied of human presence, and the colossi remained alone, their ancient purpose continuing without praise or understanding. Despite their solitude, the colossi were not forgotten by the land itself. The winds carried their echoes. The rivers reflected their silhouettes. The ruins aligned their shadows with them at dawn and dusk. Even the sun seemed to move across the sky in rhythm with their forms, casting light upon them in patterns that suggested the memory of rituals that once aligned with cosmic cycles. The valley, shaped by ancient intention, held them as part of its design. Above all, the colossi were bound to the fragments they carried. These pieces of Dormin's essence thrummed like distant heartbeats within their bodies, linking each colossus to the sealed presence beneath the shrine. They could not leave the boundaries of the valley, nor could they move without purpose. They existed as pillars of an ancient seal, woven into the rhythm of the land's silence. To disturb them was to disturb the balance that kept Dormin divided and dormant. Yet the seal, weakened by time and abandonment, had begun to shift. The colossi, though unaware of the cause, sensed the growing imbalance. Their pulses grew more pronounced, their movements more frequent. They lifted their heads toward the shrine as though feeling a distant call. Something was changing, something subtle, yet unmistakable. And although the colossi could not speak, their stillness carried the weight of anticipation, as though the valley itself knew that the balance was preparing to break. In the quiet expanses of the Forbidden Land, the colossi lived as echoes of a forgotten age. They did not seek one another, nor did they form bonds beyond the subtle resonance that linked the fragments within their cores. Each one existed in a space shaped for it alone, a domain whose terrain had been molded by ancient ritual to match its stature and purpose. These realms were vast, wide plains, deep lakes, endless caverns, towering cliffs, each a silent cradle where a guardian slept or stood, waiting without knowing why. The bond between each colossus and the land was profound. Their presence shaped the world around them in ways that no mortal eye could fully perceive. When a colossus walked, its steps pressed patterns into the soil that aligned with invisible lines of energy running beneath the valley. When it rested, its breath stirred winds that moved in deliberate directions, carrying traces of Dormin's divided essence across great distances. Even the smallest of their movements caused ripples within the ecosystem of the valley, setting off reactions that echoed through ruins, hills, and hidden monuments. Yet for all their power, the colossi were creatures of stillness. Their movements were rare, slow, and measured, guided by forces deeper than instinct. They had no need for shelter or sustenance, for they drew life not from the world around them, but from the ancient cores embedded within their forms. These cores pulsed with quiet rhythm, glowing faintly like embers deep within a hearth. The glow traveled through veins carved into their stone and fur, illuminating their bodies with a soft radiance that marked the presence of an ancient seal still holding firm. Some colossi slumbered in places where nature had reclaimed the ruins of old temples. Vines wrapped their limbs, moss softened their surfaces, and birds nested in the ridges of their stone plates. They appeared as part of the landscape, indistinguishable from the surrounding pillars and walls until they stirred from their long rest. When they moved, the vines slid away like water, and the moss trembled under the shifting weight. Yet these signs of life did not harm the creatures. Rather, they suggested that the valley accepted them as part of its ancient breath. Other colossi remained in motion, their bodies shaped for wandering the open expanses. They walked slowly across deserts where sand rolled like waves beneath their feet. They climbed cliffs where the stone groaned under the weight of their limbs. They paced through wide fields where the grass bent in waves as they passed. Their movements were deliberate, as though tracing paths remembered from centuries before. These paths had been marked by the ancient civilization, carved into the land through ritual and intention, guiding the colossi toward the places where their presence strengthened the seal. Among these wandering guardians were beings shaped with forms reminiscent of animals long lost to memory. Some carried horns like ancient bulls, curved and immense. Others bore features of lions or birds or serpents, though none were exact replicas of earthly beasts. Instead, they were interpretations of natural forms blended with architectural design, as if the builders had sought to create beings that embodied both the wildness of nature and the precision of crafted stone. Their eyes glowed softly, not with emotion, but with steady awareness, reflecting the faint pulse within their ancient hearts. The stillness of the colossi was not a sign of dormancy, but of purpose. Their existence was tied to the balance of power within the valley, and their movements depended on subtle shifts in the ancient seal. When Dormin's essence stirred beneath the shrine, the colossi felt it through the faint trembling of the ground and the shifting of wind patterns. Their heads lifted, their eyes glowed more brightly, and a hum traveled through their stone bodies like the resonance of a distant drum. These reactions were not guided by thought, but by instinct woven into their very forms. In the deep waters of the valley, some colossi lived half-submerged, their shapes hidden beneath the surface until they rose, sending ripples across lakes that reflected the sky in soft, pale light. Their long limbs moved through the water with surprising grace, disturbing neither the fish that swam below nor the birds that skimmed the surface. The lakes themselves had been shaped by ancient design to cradle these waterbound guardians, with hidden passages carved beneath the stone to allow them to move through subterranean channels. These dark, echoing spaces carried the hum of ancient energy, resonating in harmony with the cores within the colossi. In cavernous depths, colossi stood like pillars in darkness, surrounded by echoes that shifted whenever they breathed. These underground chambers were remnants of rituals long forgotten, built to anchor the energy of Dormin deep within the earth. The colossi that guarded these depths were shaped with heavier forms, reinforced by massive stone plates etched with runes that glowed faintly in the dark. Their presence stabilized the lower layers of the seal, preventing the power within the valley from rising unchecked. When they moved, the ground trembled above, sending faint vibrations across the plains and into the ruins of the shrine. One of the most remarkable aspects of the colossi was their connection to the light that fell upon the valley. Sunlight traced patterns across their bodies that activated ancient mechanisms within their forms. In certain moments, these patterns reflected onto nearby structures, revealing symbols hidden for centuries. These beams of light were part of the original rituals, intended to maintain the balance between the guardians and the sealed power. Though the significance of these alignments had long been forgotten by mortals, the colossi continued to stand in the places where the light fell most strongly, fulfilling a purpose they no longer consciously understood. At night, the colossi seemed to merge with the landscape. Their stone forms blended into the darkness, their glowing eyes the only signs of their presence. The valley grew quiet during these hours, as if the land itself wished to sleep. Stars reflected in pools of water, and the silhouettes of the colossi rose like ancient monuments etched against the horizon. Their slow breathing filled the silent air with rhythm, echoing faintly through the ruins and across the plains. Even in stillness, they radiated power, a power bound not to conquest, but to preservation. Over centuries, the colossi became embodiments of the valley's memory. Each one carried not only a fragment of Dormin, but also the lingering essence of the civilization that built them. Their stone limbs bore marks of tools no longer used. Their carved patterns represented constellations no longer known, and their positions within the valley aligned with ritual structures that had long since crumbled. They were living archives of a forgotten world, holding secrets that could no longer be spoken aloud. As the ancient seal weakened, the colossi felt the shift before any mortal could sense it. Their cores pulsed more strongly, sending ripples of energy across the valley. These ripples affected the land in subtle ways. The water in lakes rose with faint trembling. The air in canyons grew heavier. The grass in open fields leaned in directions that defied the wind. The colossi, though unaware of the cause, reacted by lifting their heads, shifting their weight, or turning toward the distant shrine of worship. Their forms, once perfectly still, carried the faint signs of awakening, as though responding to a call they had been created to answer. Despite these stirrings, the colossi remained bound to their purpose. They did not move toward the shrine nor seek one another. Their strength lay in their isolation, their power in their separation. For as long as they remained scattered across the vast valley, Dormin's essence remained divided, held in place by the ancient rituals that had created them. Only a force strong enough to disturb each guardian could disrupt this balance, a force driven by intention deep enough to resonate with the valley's ancient power. And so the colossi continued their silent vigil, unaware that a distant presence was drawing nearer, crossing the ancient bridge with quiet determination. The land, attuned to the shifting resonance of purpose, began to sense the approaching change. Though the colossi did not yet move in response, their cores pulsed more steadily, as though recognizing that the age of stillness was nearing its end. The valley awaited the moment when stone, shadow, and spirit would be tested by a choice strong enough to awaken everything that slept within its depths. The Forbidden Land had always been a quiet world, shaped by ancient intentions that had long since faded from memory. Its plains carried the weight of centuries, its cliffs bore the marks of civilizations erased by time, and its monuments stood as reminders of rituals performed in ages when the boundary between the living and the unseen was thin as breath. Yet beneath all this silence lay a single truth: the valley was never meant to be touched again. It had been left behind like a sealed chapter, a place where the mistakes of an ancient people were buried beneath stone and spirit. But the world beyond had continued moving, and sorrow had a way of returning to places where power once answered it. The ritual that had shaped the valley was never meant to be repeated. Long ago, the ancient keepers had carried Dormin's essence down into the depths of the shrine and divided it among the colossi, forging bodies of stone to bind each fragment. It was a desperate act, born of reverence and fear intertwined so deeply they became indistinguishable. The people believed this division would protect the world from forces too great for mortal hands, but they also feared what would happen if those forces were ever called upon again. And so they shaped the valley into a sanctuary where time could settle, where the seal would not be disturbed, and where the world could forget what slept beneath the shrine's foundation. But no place can remain untouched forever. The valley's stillness could not erase the traces of power embedded within its stone, and the memory of Dormin's presence lingered in shadows, in the hum of the earth, and in the faint glow of the colossi's hidden hearts. Over centuries, whispers of the Forbidden Land drifted through distant kingdoms, tales of a place where miracles might be found, where prayers long unanswered could be heard by forces older than any written belief. These whispers grew into rumors, and the rumors into legends, though none who heard them understood the true cost behind the power they spoke of. The ritual of defiance began not with the ancient keepers, but with those who came long after them, seeking answers the world had denied. The valley became a place reached only by those whose sorrow pressed so deeply into the heart that reason bent beneath its weight. Only desperation could carry someone across the long bridge that marked the boundary between the world of men and the silent realm beyond. The bridge itself felt like a test, stretching endlessly above a chasm carved by time. It had no guardrails, no markers, no inscription of welcome. It simply existed as a threshold, one that could only be crossed by those willing to surrender everything for a single hope. The ritual's foundation lay not in words but in intention. The ancient seal responded to desire, to longing shaped by loss. It was this force that moved through the valley like an unseen tide, stirring the dormant essence beneath the shrine. This longing was not violent nor born of ambition. It was a softer ache, a grief that called out quietly but with unwavering resolve. The valley felt such intention as a shift in the air, a change in the rhythm of the wind, a tremor in the faint hum that pulsed through its stone. These were the first signs of defiance, not against the valley, but against the fate that had denied the mourner what they sought. The colossi sensed this shift long before any mortal reached their domains. The fragments within them trembled faintly, like embers touched by wind. Their immense forms, usually still as monuments, held a subtle tension, as though listening for something carried across the plains. Light moved differently across their stone limbs. Shadows clung to them longer than before, stretching in unnatural patterns at dawn and dusk. The valley's balance, which had held firm for generations, quivered as though anticipating a choice that would ripple across every hidden corner of the land. The shrine itself responded with even greater sensitivity. Deep within its foundation, where Dormin's essence lay scattered but still interconnected, the tension of intention seeped downward through cracks in the seal. The presence stirred, slowly, faintly, responding not to spoken pleas but to the emotion behind them. Dormin did not perceive time as mortals did. For the presence within the chamber, centuries were but shifting shadows. What mattered was the resonance of longing that now echoed through the valley, awakening an ancient memory of power answering grief. In the ancient era, the ritual performed in this valley was meant only to divide. But the very act of division had created pathways through which intention could flow. These pathways, though sealed, still carried faint remnants of the original process. Where the colossi stood, the fragments within them reacted to the stirrings of the presence below. Where the shrine rose, its pillars vibrated softly, as though remembering the lifetimes of ceremonies once performed. The valley became a quiet instrument, shaped not by hands, but by the consequences of ancient choices. The ritual of defiance did not require the aged scrolls or carved instructions that guided ancient priests. It existed in the fabric of the valley itself. To seek the miracle buried within the forbidden land was to place oneself against the design crafted to hold Dormin in place. It was to unravel the threads that kept the seal strong. It was to challenge the decision of a people who feared the power they had created. And though the valley did not resist with violence, it resisted with silence, an immense, heavy stillness that weighed upon every step, every breath, every heartbeat. As the traveler reached the shrine, the first stage of the ritual was complete. The valley had acknowledged the presence of intention powerful enough to stir the ancient seal. The shrine did not reject this arrival, nor did it welcome it. It simply responded with a shift in atmosphere, a soft dimming of light, and a faint tremor in the stone beneath the traveler's feet. The ancient boundary had been crossed. The seal had been brushed by longing deep enough to awaken resonance. The valley was no longer indifferent, it was watching. Down in the lower chamber, where Dormin's divided essence drifted through layers of darkness, the presence drew itself inward, gathering awareness. It sensed the faint connection between the visitor's intention and the fragments held within the colossi. It recognized the stirrings of a ritual not performed by ancient keepers, but by the resolve of a single mortal. The ritual of defiance had begun not with the traveler's arrival, but with the decision that brought them across the bridge, a decision that carried the weight of love, loss, and sacrifice intertwined. Above ground, the plains held their breath. The wind moved differently, swirling in slow spirals around the shrine's entrance. The sky dimmed slightly, as though veiled by something unseen. The colossi stood still but focused, their cores pulsing in subtle unison. The valley was shifting into a new rhythm, one shaped by an approaching echo of the ancient ritual that once divided a great power, a ritual that was now preparing to be undone. The forbidden land settled into a deeper stillness as the traveler moved farther from the shrine, carrying the weight of a ritual that had already begun to take shape. The valley sensed the motion, and rearranged its quiet accordingly, as though the air itself stretched thinner around each step. The plains, cliffs, and ruins held an unspoken awareness, remembering a time when similar footsteps had echoed across their surfaces. Ages long past, when ritual was not defiance but duty. Now, however, the valley felt the shift of intention as something new, something foreign, something that pressed against ancient boundaries. The colossi, scattered across the land like remnants of a forgotten pantheon, responded first. Their immense forms did not move, yet the energy within them stirred. Their cores, hidden deep within stone and sinew, pulsed with a faint rhythm that matched the resolve of the life now wandering toward them. Each fragment of dormin sealed within their bodies vibrated with the travelers' growing proximity. This was not a call they welcomed, nor one they resisted. They simply recognized the purpose woven into the travelers' steps. The ritual of defiance did not seek their permission. It only required their existence. Far above the plains, in the silent chambers of the shrine, the tremors of awakening deepened. Dormin's presence continued to gather itself along the fractured corridors of its seal. The ancient division that once scattered its essence across the valley stirred like dust caught in a breath. The presence did not move with urgency. Time had never held meaning to it. Instead, it expanded slowly, reaching toward the faint threads connecting it to the colossi. Through these threads flowed the traveler's intention, drawing the scattered pieces toward a slow, inevitable convergence. The first colossus towered in the distance like a fragment of a primordial era. Grass grew across its shoulders, and stone wrapped around its limbs like armor that had been carved by centuries of wind and rain. Its eyes, dim and colorless until now, flickered faintly with awareness as the traveler approached. The awakening was subtle, more like memory than motion. The fragment within it responded to the presence stirring at the heart of the shrine, and the ancient balance that kept the valley still trembled. The Colossus rose, not in aggression, but in recognition. Its vast body shifted with the sound of boulders grinding against mountainsides. The ground trembled beneath its weight, sending ripples through the tall grass and across the silent water nearby. The valley did not resist the movement. It simply adjusted, accepting the tremor as part of the ritual's unfolding. Everything within the Forbidden Land had once been shaped for this purpose. Even the storms that formed at the horizon seemed to pause, watching. The traveler moved with singular resolve, stepping through shadow and grass, moving closer to the Colossus's ancient form. They carried no blessing from gods, no protection from divine powers. They carried only the depth of their longing. That longing shaped the air around them, making the valley respond as though to a forgotten command. The ritual of defiance grew stronger with each step, tightening its invisible grasp around the land. The Colossus lifted its head, its stone beard rustling with dust that had slept for lifetimes. It regarded the traveler with a stillness that held neither malice nor mercy. Its existence was not built to reason, but to guard. And now the seal it protected trembled with the approach of one willing to undo it. The fragment within the Colossus pulsed louder, resonating with the stir of Dormin's presence far below. The air thickened, as though the valley itself braced for the moment when ancient intention and mortal resolve would collide. The battle that followed was not one of hatred. The valley understood this, even if the world outside never would. The Colossus moved to fulfill its purpose, to preserve the seal. The traveler moved to break it. The clash of purpose echoed across the canyons and into the forgotten ruins. Dust rose in great clouds as stone limbs struck the ground. The earth cracked beneath footsteps the size of ancient statues. The air hummed with the weight of power awakening from ages of slumber. As the traveler climbed the Colossus's massive frame, the ritual deepened. The valley watched from every shadow, every breath of wind. The Colossus shook its great limbs in instinctive resistance, but its movements were not wild. They were deliberate, carrying the weight of the ancient seal that had kept Dormin divided for so long. The traveler ascended with determination carved from grief and devotion. Their hands grasped worn fur and weathered stone. Their heartbeat echoed the trembling of the fragment within the Titan's chest. When the moment of release came, the valley held its breath. The light within the Colossus's core burst forward, a beam of ancient energy that dissolved into the air like fading starlight. The Colossus's massive form crumbled in slow, tragic rhythm, collapsing into the ground with the quiet heaviness of a monument ending its age. Dust filled the sky in a muted bloom. Grass bent, waves rippled, and silence deepened. The first fragment of the seal had been undone. From the fallen body rose the black tendrils, thin, serpent-like streams of shadow that drifted toward the traveler with unsettling grace. They coiled around the body not in violence, but in inevitability. They pierced through the traveler's form, weaving through spirit and breath, binding them to the ritual that had begun long before they were born. These tendrils carried the essence of Dormin, the first piece of the broken seal returning toward its source. The valley reacted instantly. The wind dropped. The sky dimmed. The ground shivered lightly, as though feeling the absence of something vast. The other colossi, though far, felt the shift. Their cores flickered with brief pulses of awareness, a warning, a calling, a reminder that the balance had begun to tilt. The traveler collapsed beside the fallen titan, their bodies still but not lifeless. The black tendrils sank deeper, settling within them like coals buried beneath ash. The ritual demanded a price, and the valley collected that price quietly. The air around them softened after a moment, lifting gently as though urging them to rise again. The ritual of defiance required movement, persistence, and the willingness to continue despite the growing weight of Dormin's presence. Far beneath the shrine, the sealed chamber quivered faintly. Dormin's essence stirred with new energy, its awareness sharpening. The first fragment had returned. The seal had weakened. The valley's ancient design had been altered by a single act of mortal determination. Above, in the open world, the dust settled slowly around the fallen Colossus. The valley held a deeper silence now, as though mourning the creature that had stood for countless ages. Yet beneath that sorrow lay a deeper resonance, the rhythm of a seal breaking, the hum of ancient power beginning to gather. The traveler rose once more, unsteady but driven. The ritual had only begun its long unfolding. Beyond the horizon, 15 more colossi waited, each standing as a guardian, each carrying a piece of a power once bound for the world's protection. The Forbidden Land watched with quiet acceptance, knowing that the cycle it had long held at bay was beginning to turn again. The ritual of defiance continued. Long before the Wanderer crossed the vast stone bridge and stepped into the Forbidden Land, the realm had already lived through ages of glory, devotion, and collapse. Its silence was not born from emptiness, but from memory. Every archway, every broken pillar, every windswept plain carried the imprint of a world that once reached upward toward the divine. It was a land shaped by worship, bound by ritual, and held together by a belief so powerful that even ruin could not fully erase it. The first settlers of this realm walked through landscapes untouched by time, guided by signs carved into the rocks and whispered through the wind. They built paths across cliffs and stone causeways that bridged valleys, not merely to reach distant places, but to trace sacred lines across the land. They believed the realm itself was alive, a vessel of divine presence. Every river that cut through the canyons was a lifeline. Every hill that rose against the sky was an altar. Every shadowed grove was a place to listen for answers. In those early days, the Forbidden Land was not forbidden at all. It was a sanctuary. Temples rose from the earth like extensions of the mountains that held them. Their architects shaped stone with reverence, carving patterns of spirals, circles, and ascending lines, symbols of connection between earth and sky. Many of these structures still stood in the Wanderer's time, their forms weathered but unbroken, their foundations anchored in belief that refused to fade. Though the people who once walked those steps had vanished, their craftsmanship remained, as though the stones themselves had decided to preserve what time could not. At the heart of these ancient settlements were the bridges. They spanned impossible distances, winding across canyons wide enough to swallow whole cities. Their pillars were rooted so deeply into the cliffs that they seemed grown rather than built. These bridges aligned with celestial paths, guiding pilgrims towards sacred shrines that dotted the landscape. Every journey across them was meant to mirror a pilgrimage of the soul, a reflection of moving from the world of the ordinary to the realm of the divine. As the civilization grew, it forged a deeper bond with the forces that watched over the land. Days were marked by rituals tied to light and shadow, sunrise and sunset, the shifting of seasons. Priests climbed towers crowned with mirror-like plates, sending glints of sunlight across the plains, signals that served both practical and spiritual purpose. Festivals unfolded beneath towering arches where dancers moved like flowing water, reenacting stories of creation and renewal. Voices rose in unified chorus, echoing through the valleys until even distant cliffs seemed to hum with reverence. In time, the people discovered the shrines scattered across the land. Some were hidden within dense forests. Others stood alone on high plateaus bathed in constant sun. The most revered of these was the great central temple, the shrine of worship, whose spire pierced through clouds and whose chambers descended deep into the earth. It was said to be the meeting point of light and shadow, a place where the divine once spoke clearly before the world dimmed. The people believed that through devotion, they could maintain harmony with the invisible forces that shape their destiny. But devotion carries weight, and the line between reverence and desperation is thin. As the centuries passed, the people faced hardships that tested their faith. Storms struck with unnatural fury, tearing through villages and devastating crops. Earthquakes split the ground beneath once stable temples. Rivers dried without warning, then returned with overpowering floods. These changes were seen not as natural cycles, but as signs that the divine forces were withdrawing their favor. Fear grew like a shadow cast over every dwelling, and whispers spread that something within the realm had fallen out of balance. In response, the priests and scholars gathered in the shrine of worship, seeking answers in the oldest carvings, the most sacred texts. What they found changed the course of their civilization. Buried deep within the stone were inscriptions describing beings of immense power, guardians shaped by ancient forces, embodiments of land, sky, and spirit. These beings were neither gods nor creatures. They were vessels, souls bound in titanic forms created to anchor the realm's harmony. The people believed that if they could commune with these beings, balance would return. Thus began the era of the colossi. The civilization forged sacred bonds with these vast entities, building shrines near where each one rested. Some slumbered in valleys carved by forgotten rivers. Others stood like statues upon towering cliffs. A few drifted in open fields where grass brushed against their stone limbs like soft waves. Even in their dormant state, the colossi emitted an aura of ancient presence, a hum of power felt rather than heard, a reminder that the land itself breathed through them. Relations between the people and the colossi were not of dominance, but of reverence. Pilgrims traveled to offer prayer at their feet, leaving tokens of devotion shaped from stone, bone, or woven grass. Priests believed that each colossus embodied a fragment of divine essence, determination, endurance, clarity, memory. To approach them was to approach the foundation of creation. And so, the colossi became symbols of hope during an age of fear, embodiments of the balance that once united the people with the realm. Yet not all saw them with gratitude. A faction within the civilization began to fear the power the colossi carried. They whispered that the beings were not guardians but warnings, remnants of a forgotten struggle, burdens placed upon the land to keep something sealed away. They argued that no civilization should tie itself to forces it could not fully understand. Their fears grew as natural disasters worsened, and suspicion darkened their thoughts. Could the colossi themselves be the cause of the realm's turmoil? Tension grew between the faithful and the fearful. Pilgrims continued their rituals, climbing the shrines and praying for peace. Scholars argued that balance was being maintained, not threatened. Yet doubt had already woven itself into the heart of the people. A few called for the dissolution of the ancient practices, urging that the colossi be left alone, their power allowed to settle into silence. But for many, the thought of losing the guardians felt like surrendering the last thread of hope. The silence of the colossi only deepened the uncertainty. They moved rarely, if at all. When they did, the earth trembled, and the people looked up with a mixture of awe and fear. Priesthoods claimed these moments were signs, reminders that the guardians still listened. Skeptics argued they were merely fragments of old magic, fading slowly with time. And beneath all the debate, the land itself continued to shift, its seasons becoming stranger with each passing generation. In the midst of this turmoil, the civilization reached its breaking point. The forces they once revered began to feel distant, the rituals grew hollow, and the balance they sought slipped further from their grasp. The Forbidden Land, once a sanctuary, became a place of unanswered questions. The temples stood silent. The bridges led to places where no footsteps echoed. The colossi, once symbols of devotion, became reminders of a burden the people no longer understood. And so the realm fell, not through sudden catastrophe, but through abandonment. The people departed in waves, leaving their shrines, their bridges, their rituals behind. Nature reclaimed the paths they carved. The wind hollowed out the chambers where voices once rose in unity. The colossi remained, anchored in their places, silent witnesses to a world that had forgotten its own beliefs. The Forbidden Land became what the Wanderer discovered centuries later. A world emptied of people, filled with echoes, where every stone and shadow carried the weight of a civilization that had once dared to commune with the divine, and had paid the price for reaching too far. The land, though abandoned by its people, continued to hold the shape of their beliefs. Storms passed over the empty valleys, and sunlight drifted softly through broken archways, illuminating carvings whose meanings had long been forgotten. Yet the patterns etched into stone still hinted at a time when every curve and symbol carried weight. They were remnants of a language older than speech, a language of devotion woven directly into the bones of the realm. Even without voices to interpret them, the land remembered. Wind flowed through hollow corridors where once thousands had gathered for seasonal rites. It carried the faint scent of dust and age, brushing across mosaic floors that had lost their luster but retained their precision. These mosaics depicted cycles of renewal, spirals of water, flames rising from the earth, silhouettes of towering figures whose forms resembled the colossi. The tiles were faded and cracked, yet their arrangement remained intact, as though time itself feared to disturb their story. Beyond the temples, the plains stretched wide beneath an open sky. Tall grass swayed in long, rolling waves, each blade catching the light like threads of green silk. Herds of wild creatures wandered freely, moving through the same paths that ancient pilgrims once walked. They drank from old fountains still fed by subterranean springs, engineered by a vanished people. Their presence brought motion to a realm otherwise locked in stillness, as though nature had returned to claim what civilization had relinquished. The forests that bordered these plains grew untamed, their canopy so dense that sunlight scattered in soft fragments across the forest floor. Vines wrapped around collapsed pillars, clutching them like gentle hands unwilling to loosen their grip. Roots pushed through the cracked stone, lifting entire platforms that once hosted ceremonies of worship. Even in ruin, these spaces retained their shape, as if nature embraced them not to destroy but to protect. The balance between the wild and the sacred had shifted, yet it had not collapsed. In the extreme corners of the realm, colossal bridges and causeways remained suspended across impossible distances. Their foundations were so deeply anchored into the earth that even centuries of neglect could not bring them down. Dust gathered on their surfaces, and wildflowers sprouted between the stones, their petals spreading toward the open sky. Birds rested along the edges, their calls echoing softly through the emptiness. Once these bridges guided travelers toward shrines. Now they stood as silent monuments to a civilization that valued connection above all else. Some structures were more isolated, tucked between cliffs or hidden behind veils of cascading water. These quiet sanctuaries had not been touched by human presence for generations. Pools reflected the sky with mirror-like stillness, untouched by wind or fallen leaves. Carved statues rested partially submerged, their features softened by erosion, but still recognizable as expressions of reverence. These statues watched over the water, as though waiting for pilgrims who would never return. Beneath the grandeur and silence lay the foundations of the disaster that would eventually claim the realm. The deeper chambers of the shrine of worship held records etched into walls and tablets, records describing a pivotal decision made long before the land fell silent. The priests, upon learning the true nature of the colossi, began unraveling the mystery surrounding the ancient being sealed beneath the shrine. Their research revealed a presence that predated even the earliest settlers of the realm, a force neither benevolent nor malicious, bound not by morality, but by cosmic consequence. This entity, whose power transcended form, had been sealed away through a ritual that fractured its essence into several parts. Those parts were anchored within the colossi, binding the being's influence and preventing the resurgence of an overwhelming force. The colossi were not simply guardians, they were vessels carrying fragments of a power that could reshape the world. When the priests realized this truth, fear spread through the higher orders. Debates erupted, not among the common folk, but within the councils of those who understood the burden their civilization carried. Some believed the sealing had been necessary and righteous. They argued that maintaining the sacred bonds with the colossi would ensure continued protection. Others insisted that breaking the bond would free both people and land from a responsibility too dangerous to bear. A few extremists whispered that such a force could be harnessed, that perhaps the ancient power could heal the land or fulfill prophecies left by forgotten ancestors. These conflicting beliefs fractured the unity of the civilization, shifting the spiritual core of the realm into uncertainty. As fear grew, rituals became increasingly desperate. The people attempted new offerings, new incantations, new ceremonies meant to restore balance. But their efforts only strained the harmony further. Some shrines drew too much energy from their surrounding landscapes, causing sudden droughts or violent storms. Others fell dormant, as though the colossi themselves had withdrawn from the world. The disruption reverberated throughout the land, affecting everything from weather to wildlife. In the final years before abandonment, unnatural phenomena became commonplace. Lakes evaporated overnight, leaving behind cracked basins. Forests withered suddenly, their leaves turning to ash without fire. Caverns collapsed inward, revealing ancient chambers filled with symbols the people could no longer decipher. The land seemed to resist the presence of those who once revered it, pushing them toward departure. And so the exodus began. Some families left quietly, carrying only what they could hold. Others fled in fear during nights lit by strange lights and trembling skies. Caravans moved across the great bridges, their silhouettes shrinking against the horizon until the land claimed their absence. The cities emptied, the shrines grew cold, and the colossi remained still, their bodies frozen in postures of eternal vigilance. Nature grew bolder as the last inhabitants disappeared. Vines wrapped around temple arches, weaving through cracks and pulling down stones with patient strength. Waterways carved new paths through abandoned plazas. Birds built nests atop sacred statues. The wilderness, once kept at the edges of civilization, flowed inward like a tide returning to its rightful shore, yet the land never fully lost its reverence. Something in the silence carried the weight of past devotion. When the winds swept across the plains, they whispered through ruined corridors with a tone that felt almost liturgical. When sunlight broke through storm clouds and illuminated the central temple, it cast patterns upon the stone that resembled ancient sigils. The realm did not forget the hands that built it. In the centuries that followed, the Forbidden Land transformed from a sanctuary to a monument to its own stillness. Travelers who stood at its borders could sense the remnants of what once lived there, not ghosts, but impressions, echoes woven into the very air. The colossal structures, the silent shrines, the towering bridges all suggested a history too large to grasp, a story carved into stone rather than preserved in memory. And at the heart of that silence, beneath the shrine of worship, the sealed power remained. Its fragments slept within the colossi, waiting for the day when another wanderer would cross the ancient bridge and unknowingly retrace the steps of a civilization that had vanished under the weight of its own reverence. The land had fallen, but its story endured in every ruined stone, every forgotten path, every shadow cast by the colossal beings that stood guard over the realm, silent, eternal, and bound to a past the wanderer could never fully understand. Long before the wanderer stepped foot upon the ancient bridge, the cost of resurrection had already been written into the stones of the Forbidden Land. It was not recorded in books or carved into tablets. It existed instead in the quiet balance that shaped the realm, a balance older than temples, older than the colossi themselves. Every creature born into this world carried its weight, and every force that rose had something tethered in return. Life, in all its forms, was never free from consequence. The Forbidden Land was once a place where restoration and devotion walked side by side. The people who lived here believed that every miracle required an echo. When something was given, something else would shift, subtly or profoundly. They learned early that resurrection was not a gift to be claimed lightly. The ritual requiring it was older than language, older even than their civilization, inherited from a time when God still walked the land and shaped its boundaries with unseen hands. Within the deepest chambers beneath the shrine of worship, the earliest priests discovered symbols that spoke of reversal, of drawing the fallen back toward breath. These symbols describe the process not through instructions, but through imagery. Light breaking through shadow, warmth pushing into stillness, and a single life rising at the center while another force fractured in return. The priests recognized this as a truth of the world, not merely a rite. Life returned only when balance could be maintained, and balance demanded sacrifice. The people understood this, yet they revered it. They believed that resurrection was not meant to be denied, but to be guarded. It was a sacred responsibility, one tied to Dormin, the sealed entity whose essence lived within the colossi. To them, Dormin was less a being than a cosmic principle, a force bound not by morality, but by equilibrium. Dormin's fragments, scattered among the colossi, ensured that no life could be restored without unbinding another part of creation. As long as those fragments remained sealed, the world remained stable, but if they were disturbed, the realm itself would respond. Over time, the priests came to fear the weight of that knowledge. They ceased to pass the resurrection rites to the common people, and instead isolated them within their highest orders. They believed that if the world ever sought to reverse death again, the consequences would spread far beyond the one revived. Entire landscapes might shift, seasons might falter, and the ancient harmony between shadow and light might tremble. Such fear shaped their culture, pushing them to create the colossi not merely as guardians, but as anchors. Each colossus housed a fragment of Dormin's power, sealed into stone and sinew through rites that blurred the line between engineering and worship. The colossi stood immovable, vast and eternal, not because the people wished to dominate nature, but because they feared what Dormin's unrestrained presence could unleash. The guardians were symbols of reverence and restraint, reminders that resurrection was reserved for times of greatest need, and only with profound understanding of what would be surrendered. But fear has a way of reshaping faith. Generations later, the people no longer remembered why the colossi were built. They saw them only as sacred monuments, protectors of an ancient covenant. The knowledge of Dormin's fragmented essence faded from collective memory, surviving only in the deepest sanctuaries of the priesthood. Even there, confusion clouded the truth. Some priests believed resurrection was a gift sent by benevolent powers. Others believed it was a curse sealed away to protect humanity. A few whispered that Dormin's power was never meant for mortals at all. As understanding faded, so did caution. Certain sects began seeking ways to harness the remnants of power hidden beneath the shrine. They believed the land's slow decline, its drying lakes, shifting winds, and failing crops signaled a need to return to the rituals of old. If resurrection could be invoked once more, they reasoned, perhaps the realm could be healed. But they misunderstood the balance. When they attempted smaller rites to restore dying creatures or summon lost vitality to barren fields, the land responded with sharp and immediate imbalance. Forests wilted unexpectedly, storms burst without warning, and the foundations of the largest temples cracked under unseen strain. The people could no longer deny that something within the realm was changing. They felt it in tremors beneath their feet, in the unnatural stillness that sometimes settled over the plains, in the unspoken dread that spread through their gatherings. The priests argued among themselves. Some insisted the colossi should be strengthened, their bindings renewed. Others feared that disturbing them might trigger the very disaster they sought to prevent. Still others believed the only path forward was to abandon the land altogether, leaving the sealed power untouched and unmoved. The debates lasted for years, but the land itself answered before consensus could be reached. Unexplained phenomena multiplied. Fissures opened beneath temples, swallowing entire halls. Rivers reversed their paths for short but terrifying hours. The sky deepened into strange hues at dawn and dusk, as though the sun hesitated at the horizon. The people interpreted these signs differently, but all agreed on one truth. Something ancient was stirring beneath the shrine, something tied to Dormin's fractured essence. Some believed it was a warning. Others believed it was a beckoning, but the realm interpreted it as neither. It was simply the natural response to a balance stretched too thin. As fear overtook reverence, the final rituals performed by the priesthood grew desperate. They attempted to sever their connection to Dormin entirely, hoping to scatter the fragments of its essence farther into the world. But the rites failed, unraveling instead of sealing. The resulting shock rippled across the land with such force that the priests realized their final truth. The forbidden land was no longer a sanctuary. It was a container, and its seal was breaking. With their beliefs now fractured beyond repair, the people abandoned the realm. They crossed the bridges one last time, leaving behind temples, sculptures, and towering structures that still reached toward the sky as if calling them back. The colossi remained where they had always stood, silent and unmoving, unaware that their purpose would one day be awakened by another wanderer who sought what their makers had feared most, the return of a life taken too soon. And though centuries passed, and the world outside forgot the forbidden land, the balance within it held steady, fragile as a breath. Resurrection was still possible, but the price had not changed. To return a soul required more than desire. It demanded the unsealing of Dormin's fragmented essence, the unraveling of the guardians, and the surrender of something equal in weight to life itself. That truth waited in the still air, in the shadows beneath the shrine, in the heartbeat of the land. It did not demand worship or fear. It simply existed, an immutable law woven into the fabric of the realm, the price that would be paid the moment someone dared to challenge death. The forbidden land held its silence with the certainty of something that had witnessed countless ages pass. Yet beneath that stillness lay a tension that never fully faded, a quiet pressure woven into the air like a memory that refused to dissolve. This tension existed because the balance that defined the realm had been built upon sacrifice, not a single sacrifice, but a lineage of them, stretching back beyond memory. Every stone, every bridge, every ruin carried a subtle echo of the price that once shaped this world. The people who abandoned the land left more than their structures behind. They left their fears, their hopes, their unanswered questions. In the centuries that followed, these remnants settled into the soil, becoming part of the land's rhythm. The absence of humans did not heal the realm. It only allowed the scars to deepen quietly. Storms returned with irregular intensity. Winds rose at unnatural hours, and pools of water reflected shifting patterns as though glimpsing something unseen beneath their surfaces. The colossi, the silent guardians of Dormin's fractured essence, stood unchanging throughout these ages. They did not rust, crumble, or decay. Each remained anchored to its place, shaped by intention and bound by forces older than mortal craft. Though their builders were gone, their purpose endured. The fragments within them pulsed faintly, not in agitation but in quiet vigilance. They were not alive in the ordinary sense, yet they embodied a form of existence deeper than breath, a sacred stillness that held the land together. Around these monumental beings, the landscape shifted slowly. Sand accumulated at their feet, vines reached toward their legs, and birds circled above their towering forms. Even so, none of nature's touch could alter their design. They were too deeply linked to the equilibrium of the realm, too integral to its remaining harmony. Their presence prevented the sealed power beneath the shrine of worship from breaking free, even as time pulled the land toward a slow unraveling. Centuries passed without ceremony, marked only by the cycles of sun and moon sweeping over abandoned fields and empty halls. In this long solitude, the land learned to breathe without witnesses. Rivers carved new pathways through once sacred plazas, and winds hollowed tunnels through the stone of forgotten cities. Foliage enveloped entire walls, and monolithic stairs disappeared beneath layers of soil and moss. What had once been the center of a thriving civilization now existed as a vast tapestry of silence and slow renewal. Yet the threat beneath the land did not fade. Dormin's essence, fractured and distributed among the colossi, remained bound in place. The seals held, but the tension between them never fully stilled. Each fragment carried a faint pulse, like the heartbeat of something waiting for a rhythm that had not been heard in ages. The land trembled subtly when storms crossed the plains, as though responding to each shift in the world above. It waited not for release, but for disruption, the completion of a cycle that had begun long before the people departed. The priests had once believed that the sealing of Dormin was an act of finality. Yet the structure of the ritual had always contained a second truth, that the power could be awakened again if one were willing to surrender enough to restore what had been lost. This truth lingered in the very geometry of the shrine, in the placement of the pillars, in the lines carved along the floors. Even without inscriptions, the design itself held meaning. Balance can be maintained only through equal exchange. This principle shaped every aspect of the Forbidden Land. The architecture reflected it in symmetry. The ecology reflected it in cycles of sudden decay and renewal. The colossi reflected it in their solemn stillness. Everything waited for equilibrium to shift, not out of desire, but because the structure of the realm required eventual movement. That movement would always begin with a single choice, a mortal stepping into a promise the land had not forgotten. As centuries turned, the land grew more dreamlike, less bound to the rhythm of the outside world. Fog drifted through the valleys at hours when light should have held them clear. Lakes rippled even without wind. Shadows moved differently across the ruins, stretching slightly too far, lingering slightly too long. These were not signs of awakening, they were signs of tension, the quiet signals of a world holding something tightly that longed to unfold. Even the animals sensed it. Herds gathered at the edges of the plains, their movements cautious. Birds avoided the highest reaches of the temple, choosing distant cliffs instead. Fish in the lakes swam in slow, inward spirals, as though responding to currents not present on the surface. The land whispered its caution softly, in ways only nature could heed. Yet despite all this, there remained a sense of quiet longing woven into the realm. The shrine, though emptied of worshippers, still held a faint glow at certain hours, as if remembering prayers once offered beneath its ceiling. The bridges, though cracked, still carried the weight of past footsteps in their stones. The temples, though eroded, still reached toward the sky with a sense of purpose. It was as if the land yearned to complete the unfinished ritual, not to revive Dormin, but to restore the balance the people had left incomplete. In time, the world beyond the Forbidden Land forgot its existence. Maps faded, stories crumbled, and only faint myths persisted about a place where gods once walked. But the land remembered, the colossi remembered, the shrine remembered. The balance that shaped the realm continued its quiet vigil, waiting for the moment when someone brave enough, or desperate enough, would attempt to revive what had been lost. When that moment finally came, it would not be because the land called for it. It would be because a heart far beyond the reach of the realm would break under the weight of grief. And grief, more than any ritual or offering, possesses the power to test the boundaries of balance. The price of resurrection had been written into the foundation of the realm long before any mortal sought to challenge it. It waited, unchanged, unwavering. For resurrection was never an act of defiance, but an act of exchange, a surrender that required the unmaking of something equal to what one wished to restore. In the silence of the Forbidden Land, that truth rested like a breath held for centuries, waiting for the moment when the cycle would turn once more. Long before the wanderer ever set foot upon the ancient bridge, the Forbidden Land had already lived through countless cycles of light and shadow. These rhythms shaped the realm more deeply than the rise and fall of any civilization, for they were not simply patterns of day and night. They were the quiet exchange of power between forces older than memory. Light and shadow did not compete here. They leaned into each other, trading strength with every passing age. Within this ebb and flow lay the hidden truth of the land's endurance. The earliest priests once believed that the realm was caught in a dream suspended between creation and ruin. They observed how dawn broke differently over the plains, how twilight lingered longer in the valleys, how night fell with a softness that felt deliberate, as though the darkness wished not to startle the land. They saw meaning in these rhythms, reading them as signs that the world was governed by a force that did not care for triumph or despair, only for balance. Light rose, shadow answered, and the land carried both without favor. Over centuries, these observations became the foundation of a philosophy that shaped their rituals. They believed that shadow was not absence, but memory, a place where the past rested. Light, in contrast, was possibility, the quiet promise of what might one day take shape. Thus every day the land shifted between reflection and becoming, between remembrance and renewal. This was the cycle that defined their world, the heartbeat that persisted even after all the people had left. The colossi themselves were bound to this rhythm. Their forms, whether rising from stone or soil, responded subtly to shifts in light. At dawn, their silhouettes seemed to merge with the horizon, as though absorbing the first breath of morning. At midday, their shadows stretched across the land in long, deliberate patterns, tracing paths that reflected their purpose. At dusk, they seemed to fade into the landscape, their outlines softening as though returning to the realm that birthed them. They were not merely guardians, they were vessels through which the cycle expressed itself. Beneath the shrine of worship, where Dormin's fractured essence rested, the cycle of light and shadow pulsed more deeply. No sun reached those chambers, Yet shadows there moved with an internal logic, shifting along the stone walls as though driven by forces unseen. The priests once noted that the patterns changed depending on which Colossus was active, suggesting a connection between the guardians and the sealed essence below. They believed that the shadows were a language, speaking in rhythms rather than words, revealing hints of the balance that shaped the land. When the civilization collapsed and the realm was abandoned, the cycle continued, uninterrupted by absence. Even without rituals or caretakers, the land obeyed the quiet order written into its foundations. Certain valleys glowed faintly each dawn, as though catching light from a source beyond the sun. Certain cliffs darkened earlier at dusk, as though shadow favored them. Lakes reflected the night sky with clarity even on moonless evenings. These patterns were not random. They were echoes of the ancient harmony that governed the realm. The seasons followed this rhythm as well. The Forbidden Land did not have the same cycles as distant kingdoms beyond the mountains. Its summers were long and still, marked by slow winds that carried warmth across empty fields. Its winters were mild, more like long twilights than true cold, with a hush that made the world seem frozen in contemplation. Spring brought not blossoms but clarity, sharper light, cleaner air, reflections more vivid. Autumn arrived as a thinning of sound, a soft retreat of life, preparing the land for silence. Each cycle mirrored the realm's internal balance, undisturbed by human presence. Over the centuries, the cycle began to weave itself into the ruins themselves. Stone pillars collected faint halos of light during certain hours, then released them at dusk in soft glimmers that drifted across the plains. Moss grew in patterns that mirrored constellations. Pools deepened into darker shades as though gathering shadow for safekeeping. The realm was not decaying, it was adjusting, responding, breathing, the way a living being inhales and exhales without effort. In some corners of the land, the balance leaned subtly toward shadow. Ancient halls grew darker than their architecture allowed, filled with a quiet that felt deeper than silence. In other places, light lingered unnaturally, illuminating ruins that had not felt human footsteps in centuries. These anomalies were not signs of imbalance, but rather expressions of the delicate dance that kept the realm in motion. The land had become a reflection of a cosmic principle. Nothing existed alone. All things leaned into their opposite. The greatest evidence of this truth lay in the colossi. Though they remained still, their presence created patterns in the surrounding world. The air around them shifted with temperature more subtly than elsewhere. The ground near their feet grew either softer or harder, depending on their nature. Some colossi embodied shadow, drawing darkness toward their resting places, creating pockets of cool, deep stillness that never fully warmed. Others carried the echo of light, radiating a faint brightness that bent the air around them and reflected in nearby stones. Together, they formed a map of the land's internal balance. Through this interplay, the realm held Dormin's essence in place. Each fragment of the sealed force responded to shifts in light and shadow, never fully waking but never fully asleep. The priests had once theorized that Dormin's power was tied to cycles older than the world itself, that the entity had no allegiance to creation or destruction, but maintained a rhythm of its own. To bind such a force required a land shaped to support its balance, a living vessel that could distribute shadow and light in equal measure. As the centuries passed, the land strengthened this equilibrium. The absence of mortals removed the unpredictability of desire, ambition, and fear. Animals lived according to instinct, plants according to season, stones according to gravity. Everything responded to the land's internal breath, creating a harmony that grew deeper with time. Even after centuries of ruin, the realm did not collapse. It endured because the cycle endured. The breath of the world continued, soft and steady. Yet this harmony also meant that any disruption, no matter how small, would eventually ripple through the land. The priests had known this. It was why they feared resurrection rituals that tampered with the sealed essence beneath the shrine. It was why their society fractured under the tension of misinterpreted signs and forgotten knowledge. And it was why the departure of their people, though necessary, was not enough to sever the bond between the realm and the power it contained. Even the smallest shift, a single presence crossing the ancient bridge, would one day bend the balance. For the land was not merely a place, it was a vessel, holding together light and shadow in fragile unity. One life lost, one life returned, one choice made at the edge of grief, all could tip the balance, reshaping the cycle that had endured for ages. The realm waited, holding its breath in the long twilight of solitude. Light fell upon its plains with gentle warmth. Shadows curled along its ruins with quiet patience. The cycle continued, unbroken, echoing through mountains, across valleys, through the still chambers beneath the shrine. For balance does not end. It shifts, and one day it would shift again, as softly and as inevitably as dusk becoming night. As the forbidden land drifted through its long solitude, the cycle of light and shadow deepened into something almost ceremonial. Though no human eyes watched it, and no rituals guided its rhythm, the land moved through each day and night with the quiet precision of a world shaped by purpose. The balance remained intact, upheld by the very design of the realm. The colossi stood like pillars of an ancient equation, and beneath the shrine, the sealed fragments of Dormin echoed faintly with each turn of the cycle. Even without worshippers, the shrine of worship remained the central point around which this balance turned. At dawn, its highest towers glowed with a pale radiance that softened the edges of the stone. The light moved slowly across its surfaces, revealing carvings that seemed to shift subtly as the sun rose. At midday, the shrine cast long lines of shadow across the valley floor, forming geometric shapes that aligned with unseen pathways beneath the ground. At dusk, the structure was engulfed in deepening darkness, as though pulled gently back into the realm from which it had emerged. The shrine existed not just in the land, but in the cycle itself, a structure built to hold light and shadow with equal reverence. The colossi mirrored this rhythm with their own silent participation. During the brightest hours of the day, their towering forms cast shadows so vast that valleys darkened beneath them, as though night had arrived early. These shadows, though heavy and still, never felt threatening. They were part of the land's breath, part of the equilibrium that defined the realm. At night, the colossi appeared almost weightless under starlight, their stone limbs reflecting faint glimmers as though holding the memory of daylight within them. Their eyes, though dormant, sometimes caught the moonlight, shining like distant beacons marking the edges of an ancient map. Some colossi were more attuned to shadow. They dwelled in deep canyons or quiet glades where sunlight rarely reached. These regions were cooler and softer, filled with pockets of mist that formed at unexpected hours. Shadow gathered around these giants as though drawn to their presence. Birds avoided flying near them during dusk, preferring the open plains instead. Small animals approached their resting places cautiously, sensing the quiet depth of the darkness that lingered there. Other colossi aligned with light. They stood in open fields or atop plateaus where the sun's rays touched their stone forms from dawn to dusk. Their surfaces warmed as the day progressed, holding onto heat long after the sun had set. At night, they released the warmth in soft waves, creating gentle breezes that moved across the grasslands. Wildlife often gathered near them, drawn to the subtle comfort their presence offered. These colossi served as anchors of day, balancing the weight of shadow held by their counterparts. The lands surrounding each colossus adapted to their nature. Valleys inhabited by shadow-bearing guardians grew thick with moss and quiet pools of water. Cliffs watched over by light-bearing guardians glowed with pale lichen that illuminated the rocks after sunset. Lakes near certain colossi reflected moonlight in patterns that resembled ripples of ancient script. Forests oriented their growth in ways that mirrored the alignment of the colossi. bending slightly as though acknowledging their silent influence. This harmony extended far beneath the ground, threading through the pathways that connected each guardian to the sealed fragments of Dormin. The presence below did not move, yet it reacted to the cycle through vibrations that pulsed faintly along the stone. These pulses were not signs of awakening, but reflections of the land's breath, slight tremors that indicated the balance remained unbroken. They traveled from the shrine to the colossi, then returned, forming an unspoken language that only the land understood. Yet within this harmonious cycle, there existed a quiet tension. For harmony does not imply permanence. It implies balance held carefully, delicately. If the colossi were ever disturbed, if even one fragment of Dormin's essence shifted from its place, the entire cycle would begin to waver. Light might linger too long. Shadow might deepen without retreat. Seasons might drift out of rhythm. The land knew this truth, for it had felt something similar in the centuries before the Exodus, when the priests unknowingly strained the balance through misguided rituals. The realm had trembled then, reacting with storms and droughts that signaled its distress. Now, in the long quiet of abandonment, the land remained steady. But it waited, not with impatience nor with longing, but with the certainty that cycles always turn. Every breath the realm took, every shift of shadow, every glimmer of light foretold a future moment when the balance would be tested again. The land did not fear that moment. It recognized it as part of its existence. Time moved gently across the forbidden land, smoothing the edges of ruins and deepening the shadows beneath fallen arches. Light faded from ancient carvings but returned each dawn with renewed softness. Animals lived and died within the embrace of the land. Plants grew and decayed. Winds carried seeds across plains where once pilgrims walked. All things participated in the great cycle, knowingly or not. Yet beneath the surface, the sealed essence of Dormin remained unchanged. It did not sleep, for sleep implies forgetting. Dormin remembered everything, every ritual, every offering, every moment of reverence or fear. This memory existed not in emotion but in state, in the tension between its fractured pieces. The entity was bound by design, unable to move freely, yet attuned to every shift in the land's balance. When the cycle leaned slightly into light, Dormin's fragments adjusted. When it leaned into shadow, they responded in kind. The seal held only because the balance held. The land itself had become the final guardian, not through intent, but through nature. Its rhythms maintained what priests could not. Its cycles upheld what civilization failed to protect. Every dawn and dusk, every tide of season and silence, kept Dormin bound more effectively than any ritual. The colossi served as pillars, the shrine as a container, but the land was the breath that kept the seal intact. Centuries passed, leaving no mark on the sealed presence beneath the earth, except the calm certainty that the cycle would one day shift. It understood that life would eventually return to the valley. It recognized the inevitability of grief. For grief, more than worship or ritual, had the power to tilt the balance. One life lost in the world beyond would create a resonance that echoed across distance and time. And when that resonance reached the forbidden land, the cycle would feel it. The way a lake feels the tremor of a distant stone. One day, the ancient bridge would tremble beneath new footsteps. A heart shaped by longing would cross into the valley. Light and shadow would shift, subtly at first, then overwhelmingly. The colossi would stir, not out of anger but necessity, and the seal beneath the shrine would respond, piece by piece, to the final turning of the cycle. For the forbidden land understood a truth older than its ruins. Every cycle must break so another may begin. And in that breaking lies the quiet, inevitable promise of rebirth. When the dust of ages finally settled across the forbidden land, the realm returned to its ancient rhythm. Light drifted gently across the plains where stone giants once stood, and shadows moved more softly, no longer stirred by the presence of a wandering heart. The great bridge, far in the distance, remained silent once more, its arches holding the weight of stories that only the wind remembered. The shrine of worship stood unchanged at the valley center, its pillars worn but steady, its inner chamber filled with the faint echo of a power that had risen and fallen through countless cycles. Nothing stirred beneath its altar now. The fragments of Dormin lay dormant again, quiet as deep water, their strength gathered back into the stillness of the earth. What had been unleashed had returned, not erased, but folded into the land like breath returning to the lungs. Across the empty fields, the footprints of colossi faded beneath drifting sand and new growth. Moss climbed their fallen forms, and wildflowers rooted themselves in cracks shaped by ancient battles. The land healed as it always did, slowly, patiently, in rhythm with the pulse of seasons. It held no anger, no memory of struggle, only the quiet knowledge that change and restoration were bound together like dusk and dawn. In the far corners of the realm, small creatures moved again, unafraid. Birds circled above the old shrines, and the rivers that once reflected the collapse of balance now carried only light. The forbidden land no longer stood as a place of sorrow, but as a reminder of cycles older than grief, older than hope. It was a world shaped by sacrifice, purified by loss, and renewed through the soft persistence of time. And somewhere within its vast silence, beneath the shadows of ancient arches and the glow of morning across the stone, the faintest echo remained. Neither warning nor prophecy, but the gentle truth the land had always known, that every ending leaves behind a seed, and every ruin carries the pulse of a world waiting to be born again. A land untouched by time waits beneath a sky that never speaks. Its silence feels older than faith, older than memory itself. Step inside, and the air shifts as if the past is watching. Walk deeper, and you will learn why ruins never truly sleep.